be chatting with Kristin about AI and automation and marketing. Did I miss anything, Kristin?
No, you got it all. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So one thing that really caught my eye recently is the publishing of This Marketing Blog Does Not Exist. I feel like you've been asked this question a whole lot.
No, that was the point of trying to make it, to start a conversation about these new technologies.
Nice. So could you walk us through, like, the purpose behind it, the process, creating it and all that?
Yeah, sure. So maybe a year or two ago, a site called This Face Does Not Exist was released, and it was essentially, you can refresh the page as many times as you want, and it'll show you a new face that was completely generated by a GAN network, like a new AI model for.
So now that we've dealt with the fun technical issues that we can never escape, as we all know, my initial question to you, Kristin, is what was the whole inspiration and what was the process behind the This Is Marketing Blog Does Not Exist?
Yeah. So the inspiration was a blog that came out a few years ago called This Face Does Not Exist, I think. This person does not exist. And it used a state-of-the-art image generating GAN model to create essentially indistinguishably real-looking human faces. So, and that was one of the first times that I saw something from like this new class of AI that blew my mind and made me feel like things are really changing quickly, and there are a lot of new and interesting implications for technology. And some of them could be highly beneficial, and some of them could be scary and hurt industries like content marketing. So ever since I had seen that, it was just kind of stuck in my head. And then I'd been following advances in natural language processing, and over the last couple of years, new network architectures have come along that have kind of been like the next step in the evolution of text generation and other natural language processing tasks. They're called transformer networks. And the first one that made big news was called GPT-2, which was sort of released by, I think it was released by OpenAI, but they didn't release the full version of it. They released like a partial version that was not as powerful as the full version that they had used as the basis for their paper and the text generation examples that they ended up showing the press, and that got them a lot of news.
Right. I remember that one. They said it was like too powerful to release, and they didn't want everyone getting their hands on it.
I don't know how much of that was marketing, but like this was I think at the beginning of this year that it came out. Mm-hmm. But the text generated passages were like an order of magnitude better than anything else that had been released. So they first released a model that was like, I think, a quarter of the size of the one that they had generated this amazing text with. And then later on, they released one that was about half as powerful. And now I think there's one that's like 3/4 as powerful. But in the meantime, between when that was released and today, a bunch of other companies released their own transformer networks, text generation NLP networks. One of which is called Grover, which was created by Rowan Zellers at Allen AI. And this one was trained on a different data set. It was trained on a news data set, and was also a very large transformer model that was near equivalent to the unreleased GPT-2 model. At least that's my understanding of it. I could have that partially wrong, but it generated text that, in my opinion, was significantly better than what the partial models of GPT-2 that had been released could do. So they also released a web interface for it, which was really cool. So you could play with it without having to like install their code libraries and try and run it yourself on your own machine or virtual machine. So that when I saw that and I realized how good the text generation was, it really made me want to do more with it. So I approached Rowan Zellers, and he was offering to release the full model to people who wanted to play with it. So I got access to the full model, and we set it up. And he also released his code base. So we set up the full model with his code base on our own servers, and then we used it to generate about 600 articles based on marketing content. So essentially what I did was I scraped a list of the most popular, like SEO, content marketing, social media marketing, a few other sub areas of digital marketing. And then for each of those, I found the most popular articles based on like social sharing. So I just used BuzzSumo to pull those articles. And then I used those titles as the prompts for the Grover AI to create the pages, essentially, or the text for the pages. And that was relatively straightforward. It was a little difficult to set up the code to work properly, but got it working, and then generated about 600 articles, like I said, and just loaded them into a blog. Like, that was honestly the simplest part, just setting up a super easy WordPress install, and then adding a plugin to bulk upload articles, and that was basically it.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it was just a really simple thing, and I can't really take too much credit, because all I really did was get the model and install it and run it, and then take the output and put it into a blog. But I really wanted to do that because I wanted to start a conversation about the implications of these new technologies for content marketing, for SEO. And then, there are larger, maybe even more important implications having to do with, the role of humans in creating text content and really media in general in the future, and also issues around fake news and propaganda and troll armies of other countries trying to influence us. I mean, all of these things could be used for good and bad purposes, but for a content marketer, for an SEO like me, the conversation I really wanted to have was around what happens when these technologies become easier to use and more ubiquitous, and then you have a lot of gray hat, black hat SEOs who leverage them to essentially fill the internet with a ton of computer generated low quality content. What happens to Google in that case, and what happens to search in general in that case when potentially there's more computer generated content on the internet than there is human generated content. So that was the impetus for it. That's why I wanted to do it and start a conversation around it. And I think it's done that. But I mean, the real heroes or villains, however you want to look at it, are the people who are creating these state-of-the-art models.
Right. And like, I guess, what do you see that future being in terms of, okay, a bunch of gray hats and black hats release a whole ton of, computer generated text. Do you see Google being even able to differentiate that? Or even like, say, manual reviewers being able to differentiate that?
Yeah. I mean, if you can't, at this point, the text generation is getting so good that, I mean, like the most recent one, which I can talk about later, is a new one that Salesforce put out called Control. Right. And the output, so I've been playing with it a little the last few days, and the output from it is, in my opinion, the best that I've seen. And I have a hard time, like if I had it write a passage and then I compared it to another passage that was human written, I don't think with like really greater than 50-50 accuracy, I'd be able to tell you which was which.
Wow.
If that's the case, then human reviewers don't do us a whole lot of good. Of course, that might be different depending on the domain. Like some things would be a lot easier to generate, passable text for than others. But yeah, I think there are probably a lot of scary implications for human review in terms of that. In terms of using, adding to their algorithm to be able to identify it, I mean, I think it'll become an arms race. There will be new models coming out all the time that can pass the tests of whatever sort of verification models Google decides to implement or not. I mean, the Grover model is actually positioned as like a fake news checker or identifier, and it can do that. Part of what it does, you can sort of run it in reverse, and it'll tell you if it thinks it was human generated or computer generated. But it's relatively easy to fool. I mean, even if you put like like 3 periods at the end of it, it'll think it's human. So like there are a bunch of ways to get around it. And so I can't imagine it would be very easy for Google to come up with like a foolproof method for defeating like existing and all future iterations of these new NLP models that can generate almost human quality text. And even if they did, I'm not sure how feasible it would be, given that they would have to run these models over everything that they indexed, which computationally would be really expensive, I would think.
Yeah, you would need a few server farms just for that.
Right. And, I think there's also indications that they're not great at identifying like really early iterations of computer generated text that people still do, like article spinning, where it's just like a Mad Lib style find and replace situation, or text summarization that just uses there are some AI models that will do text summarization, which pull out pieces of an article and put them together in a new order, a shorter form. Those sorts of things, I mean, they still work as SEO hacks. So if they haven't caught up to that level of sophistication, it doesn't seem realistic that they're super close to being able to implement something that's going to be able to catch this stuff, at least at scale right now. But I don't know. I mean, that's pure speculation. So maybe someone at Google would know a lot better than I would.
Mm-hmm. So can Grover write my kids' term papers?
I don't know. What grade are your kids in?
6th.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you could definitely get a passing grade on like a book report written by any of the newer models. I'm really not kidding. In fact, some of them might actually raise a teacher's suspicions because they would be more sophisticated than what the kid's writing.
Wow.
Some of them are really good. And because they're trained on so much data, they pull out like the most salient pieces of a topic. So it wouldn't just be like syntactically or grammatically correct. It would also include like the right information.
I was shocked by how good your blog was. I felt like it was a little keyword stuffy, but really just barely. Like I was like, I kept reading it in sentence after sentence. I was like, okay, does it feel like a person wrote it? It was shocking.
Yeah. To me, it was totally shocking as well. And then if you really pay attention to what's being written, you start to notice additional things that the model is doing. So like one of the first articles, I think maybe it's the main one. I think I pinned it because I was so impressed with it. It's like 5 Instagram filters that are best for content marketing. And
can you show us
yeah.
What you like?
Just one second.
Sorry, I was moving around the room, guys. This is the first time I've ever had to struggle with getting this with this specific type of struggle with getting our Hangout to work. Usually it was trying to get it to publish live to YouTube. That we gave up.
Okay, can you see?
Yep.
The other thing I forgot to mention is I used StyleGAN. So the thing that was used to make this person does not exist, I created these fake authors. So that face was created by an AI too. Anyway, what I thought was so interesting about this is what photo filters are best for Instagram marketing. It does like a bunch of really cool things. So like first you'll notice it comes up with names for things. So it realizes that this would make sense to be created by some sort of marketing blog. And then it says tech-focused publication Mobile Syrup asked a bunch of Instagram artists for their favorites. So Mobile Syrup was just a publication name it made up, but it makes sense as one. And then it pulls out these people it says are influencers. Some of these are real people, but some of them aren't. So like Fredo Santana, that's actually one of the keywords that I noticed this page started ranking for, weirdly. Then Lexi Flores. So it makes up like these names of these people, and then it makes up the names of the bands that they belong to. And most of these bands don't exist. And then it starts talking about, for each of these influencers, it talks about what filters they like most. And it makes up a bunch of names of filters, which sound like they could be filters. Meta, Val, Rose Mist. And then some of them, they also describe what the filter does. So like, there's just a lot of understanding built into this. Like the structure of it is in a similar structure to what you would find in a news article, and that it's an interview style, and each paragraph is a subsection where that subsection is made up of an individual influencer that it made up, who the influencer is, why they're famous, and then what filter they like and why it would be applicable. And I just found that really compelling and a good illustration of kind of the depth of understanding that these new transformer models have. They're not just predicting from one word to the next. They're taking they form an understanding across larger distances of text, so they can refer back to things, and they can have an organizational structure that isn't restricted to just like a few sentences. And then they'll also call back to things that were like really early on in the article. So that to me was one of the first things that I noticed about some of these that it produced that I thought was, really, really interesting.
For sure. Now, you brought up the control repo by Salesforce, and you recently published a very interesting post on Traffic Think Tank with the Trump tweet bot.
Yeah.
Would you care to share for people who haven't seen it?
Sure, yeah. So Salesforce.
So did you talk with Hamlet about that?
No.
Did you talk with Hamlet Batista? Because he did something similar at Tech
really?
SEO Boost.
No, I haven't talked to him.
I want to hear yours though. I'm sure it's hilarious, and your language model's newer, so it's probably bigly. It's like much better, it's bigger, it's huger.
Well, it's not mine. It's the Salesforce team built it, but yeah, they released it. I think maybe like 3 weeks or a month ago, and it was, at least as far as I know, it's still the largest transformer model. So I think it's like 1.6 billion parameters, which is slightly larger than the unreleased GPT-2 model from earlier this year, which is still unreleased. So as far as I know, it represents like 100% state of the art for text generation. And then earlier this week, I think like actually 6 or 7 days ago, they updated the code base to include a new module for fine tuning it. So essentially you can take the pre-trained model that they released, the 1.6 billion parameter model, and fine tune it with text of your choice. So in this case, I set up the model on a virtual machine. You have to use like an 8 GPU virtual machine that's actually a little bit expensive to run, just because it's so big. But I set that up, and then I fine-tuned it on a pretty large corpus of Trump transcripts of his speeches. And I trained it, the first night I trained it for like an hour or two, and then over the next day or two, I subsequently trained it a lot more. And it's gotten, at least in my opinion, it does really, really well in mimicking him. So I can actually share that if you just give me 1 second. I can show you.
I'm hoping you can talk with us about getting sentiment out of content, because I used a pretty similar API where I think there's a Trump speech API, and I was trying to figure out how to get sentiment out of them, and I struggle with I struggle with pulling out phrases versus just words minus stop words, and I feel like there's tension between the two, and you kind of lose meaning at some point. I was just going to say there's tension between entities and adverbs and adjectives, and I feel like you lose meaning when you pull out some of the stop words sometimes. And when you're trying to come up with ad copy or like meta descriptions or page titles or whatever, there's a point at which you start to lose valuable stuff, and I'm wondering how you kind of think through that.
I mean, in terms of AI that does sentiment analysis, I haven't done a whole lot with it. I know there are a lot of different options that work variably well. To me, it still seems like a pretty rough thing that hasn't really advanced to the point where it truly captures sentiment that well. Like we've done a bunch of projects at Fractl that have incorporated sentiment analysis in some way or another, and oftentimes when you spot check it, it just feels like, yeah, it's looking at like individual words and not really understanding the context or, you know, the multi-word segments very well. So yeah, I haven't been super impressed with the utility of sentiment analysis yet.
It's just interesting. Their review tools are pulling in, they're using Watson to process stuff. And they're saying, hey, we're seeing these entities show up in reviews, and it might be taco or car or customer service, but it doesn't really give you meaning about them or sentiment about those entities. It's just saying like entity name. And I don't know, I come up with Data Studio reports about it, and I feel like there's just not enough meaning in it unless you really play around with it, and then all of a sudden you'll find like that magic sweet spot. But it's not something that you can transfer from one business or vertical to another. So it's like, this is frustrating.
Yeah, I haven't seen, and this doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't really seen anything that can effectively understand sentiment about specific entities, like within the context of a sentence.
Yeah.
But you know, at least not very effectively.
Yeah.
So do you want me to share my screen? I can show you
Yes.
a passage from, actually, I didn't post this one yet on Traffic Think Tank. So I don't want to keep posting all of this stuff on there. Anyway, 1 second. So I fed it the prompt, I should be elected for a second term as president, and this is what it wrote. Can you guys read that, or do you want me to read it out loud?
Can you zoom in a little?
Yeah.
Super long. It's amazing. That's like how he would talk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it even includes things like, because the training corpus had like audience reactions in it. You can see like in the 4th line, it has booing, and him reacting to the booing.
Wow. Like that's really impressive.
Yeah, I honestly, if I showed this to either of you guys and told you that this was part of Trump's speech yesterday, like, I don't think you'd come back to me and say, I think this was written by an AI.
No, not at all. So do you plan on rerunning your experiment with the marketing blog that doesn't exist with Control? And
Oh, geez. Probably not, because Control is a much larger model and it takes a lot longer to create text. So it would probably take a few weeks to generate a few hundred articles, and it would cost probably a few $100s at least. I don't know. I mean, it's tempting to see if there's any improvement on this versus the Grover model that I made this marketing blog does not exist from. Yeah, maybe in the future. I don't know. I have some misgivings about doing a lot more of, you know, putting this kind of text onto the internet, like outside of the goal of just trying to publicize the scariness of this technology. I've actually already seen that there are a couple companies that are using GPT-2, not Grover, but somebody that's using one of the larger GPT-2 models to sell automated text or automated articles, essentially. So that, I mean, it's already beginning. You know, there are already a couple services that provide that, which to me is kind of crazy. I think they sell the articles for like 50 cents a piece, for like 500-word articles. These are, I mean, they could be creating millions a day. So.
Wow.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what lessons can you teach us about scaling an agency? You've done it twice.
Okay. Yeah. So my first agency, I started with my brother and my brother-in-law in 2007, right out of college. It was a content marketing agency, but the focus was really on infographic creation, when that was kind of the thing that really worked well for link building. And after operating that for, I think, 3 or 4 years, we decided to sell it to a company called Blue Glass in Tampa, and become part of their team. That didn't really end up working out the way that we thought it would or should. So we ended up leaving there after about a year, and taking the lessons that we learned through that process, and deciding to start a new agency. And that's the agency that we started, is Fractl. So Fractl is about 6 or 7 years old now. And we are a content marketing agency. Our focus is on data journalism driven link building. So trying to generate press through the vehicle of data driven storytelling. And our agency is essentially made up of content creators and content promoters. And the way that we, at least in my opinion, the two biggest factors in helping us grow are the quality of our work differentiates us, our process differentiates us, because we do more than just content creation. We also promote that content. Our results differentiate us. And then we do a lot to generate inbound lead flow. And that really comes down to doing things like This Marketing Blog Does Not Exist, which are, at least in our opinion, kind of thought leadership pieces for the industry, trying to start conversations, and then also doing a lot of work exploring the aspects of our business that really matter to success. So what goes into creating content that can really get news pickups? What are publishers interested in? How do you pitch publishers properly? How do you leverage data science, machine learning, to really come up with new and newsworthy stories that other people haven't done before? And then how do you pair that with digital PR to effectively get it picked up by the press? Then how do you support that with additional outreach and additional syndication support to make sure that you can get like the maximum value possible out of the work that you've done and the promotions work that you've done?
It feels to me like there's so many different ways of thinking to do. There's so many different types of brains to execute that well. How did you guys all split up the roles? Like how does your executive team split up that? Because writing is so much different than data science. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say our creative team has had to become proficient at storytelling and also data analysis. And that's really a role of a data journalist. And that's how we think of our content creators here. That their main purpose is to tell a story, but they're doing it through data. And that's, there's been a learning curve to that, but we've been working on that for, pretty much the entire time we've been working for Fractl, and we've developed a team that has become experienced in doing it. And through iteration over time, we've learned what works well and what doesn't work well, what sorts of projects require more effort than they're actually worth, which ones will have a high ROI for the amount of effort required, what sorts of topics and what sorts of data-driven content executions seem to resonate well with the people that we pitch. So there's a lot that's gone into it over the long term in getting it right and improving and being able to do something that can scale and offer similar results across a lot of different clients. In terms of our E-team, I mean, I'm really lucky that it's a family business. So the people that own it are me, my brother, my brother-in-law, and my partner. And that has made things a lot easier because everyone's really aligned all the time. We're all working toward the same goal and we all have a familial connection. But with that said, it can also be hard working with family. And so it's really important to like divide and conquer, and for each person that, each partner in Fractl to really have a focus on a different area of the business, and for there not to be a huge amount of overlap between us. We come together when we have to make decisions that affect the entire agency, and set goals and things like that. But I'm not the CEO. I run the creative team at Fractl. My brother runs sales. My brother-in-law Nick is the CEO, so he he does all of the CEO responsibilities. And then my partner, Kelsey, she manages the outreach team and the growth team. But we all contribute to other pieces too. So I like to contribute a lot to like the thought leadership and outreach, because it allows me to kind of like stretch my creative muscles and explore new methodologies that we maybe wouldn't do for clients. But because we have more time to do things for ourselves, I can do more experimental things and try and find answers that aren't really easy to come by, that we're interested in as an agency, and that we think the greater SEO and content marketing industry would also be interested in.
What parts of the business have you guys found easiest and hardest to manage or scale?
I don't think any of them have been easy to scale, really, because the type of work that we do is content creation. Each individual project probably requires 40 plus hours of work from our content creators, and then maybe 30 to 40 hours of work in pitching. So
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot, because it's one-to-one pitching. It's trying to find the right home for something that we consider, and hopefully that the publishers we're pitching consider interesting and newsworthy. So you have to approach it in like a very high touch way. So there are ways that we've done a lot of work improving internal processes to try and remove bottlenecks, to try and maintain quality assurance. And so there are efficiencies that can be gained process-wise internally, but in terms of like the work itself, there are limitations to like how low you can go, I think, just because the nature of the work is pretty time intensive. Is that your original question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's pretty amazing. I spent some time on your LinkedIn profile before the call, and I loved how you had those two links at the top of your profile, how you link right into the deck. I thought that was really cool. And one of the things that I remembered on the deck was that you average something like 90 backlinks per project. And I'm just doing the math. If you're doing 30 hours of pitching and you're getting 90 links, it's pretty fascinating. That's so much work. I mean, content promotion is the thing that I feel like in my small agency, I just don't have enough time for oftentimes. And I can dedicate some time per client per month, but not enough. And I know that that's where the rubber meets the road. And we've automated so many processes so that we'd have more time for things like content promotion. What have you guys been able to automate? Sorry to ramble at you, but what have you guys been able to automate that you're really proud of?
In terms of automation, it really has mostly to do with like workflow. So, but we leverage a lot of like off-the-shelf tools. So like our project management software is Asana, and that's worked great for us. Mm-hmm. We use Slack internally, and then we use a tool called Clipfolio to essentially monitor our productivity and the quality of our work. So we've built dashboards for each segment of our business to understand the promotions team and the production team independently. So we have metrics on how many pitches are coming out each day, what the success rates of those pitches are, what the placement rates are, what the rejection rates are, what the response rates are. We can look at that granularly at each individual MRA, or media relations associate, as we call them. We can look at it by account team. We can look at it by client. And then from that, we can extrapolate and understand benchmarks across the entire agency and across account groups and across clients. And that helps us set expectations for those team members and measure their work against those expectations. On the content side, we have something very similar. It's just the metrics that we use to evaluate them and to evaluate our efficacy are based on the quality of the content and the speed at which it can be produced. So we set benchmarks for how long an individual project should take, what the average is or the median is for an individual team member across a quarter or across half a year, what that looks like by account team, what it looks like by client, and then lots of other metrics that are about the quality of the work. So we do 2 internal peer reviews per project. So we do one at an early stage and one at sort of like a final draft stage. And at both of those stages, we are recording our senior creatives are scoring and recording the quality of those pieces of content. And then that's part of one of the metrics that we use to evaluate the creatives that produce them, like on a quarterly or half-year basis. So we've automated like the analysis part a lot, and I think that's helped us to understand where we need to work on things and where things are working well and where things have improved. It gives us insights into how we can adjust internal processes to become more efficient and better quality and create better quality work. In terms of automating the process of data journalism or content creation using data, there's a ton of individual specific things. So like, dozens and dozens of scripts that have been written by our development team to help automate parts of the data collection process for a lot of different specific individual cases. Some that are extensible. So like we've done a ton of work with like the fatal accident reporting system, which is a government data set that gives a huge amount of detail on fatal accidents. So we've used this data set for a variety of clients in like the car insurance and car sales space. And so we put a good amount of time into decoding that data set and putting it in formats that we can easily analyze. So a lot of times there's a lot of hidden time and money spent in that data acquisition and data cleaning portion of the content production process. And you don't want to have to do that same thing over and over again. So where there are opportunities for us to like simplify either parts of those process, data cleaning or data acquisition, we do that. And then we can reuse those pieces of code later on. Other team members can use them when they're doing similar projects or even completely different projects that rely on the same data sets. So we do a lot of that. The other part is just trying to help our team level up. So we want, in the next year or so, we want our entire creative team to learn the basics of Python, just because it can massively simplify some of those early stages in the data acquisition and data analysis process. If our creatives can themselves scrape data from the internet or can themselves transform and clean data using pandas and Python, it can save 20%, 30% of the time that they would have spent trying to pull it in and out of Excel or these other tools to clean data that are not as extensible, not as fast, and just more difficult to use generally than if you've taught yourself or learned the basics of some of these these Python libraries that will help you clean and manipulate data much better and faster. So
Python is amazing. I feel like a total noob. The thing that's frustrating about it is you'll spend time on GitHub, you'll find a repo that you want to work with, you'll then try and pull it in, and then you try and run it, and the first 2 hours is just like dealing with broken dependencies. It drives me flipping nuts, and it's just like,
I know exactly how you feel. I'm a relative Python newbie too, and yeah, I mean, like setting up these transformer models is like setting up that the Salesforce control one was like a giant pain in the ass. Even though it was like decently well documented, like there's just a lot of ways that you can go wrong, that especially if you're relatively new to it, you don't have the intuitive understanding of why or what might be wrong. And so it can just be like a very clunky, frustrating process. But I found that when I have something that I'm really interested in seeing work, I'll have like the dedication and fortitude to see it through. And through that process, I'll learn a lot more. So like for me, part of learning and getting better at Python is picking like these pet projects that I find fascinating and then just brute forcing it until I can get to where I want to be.
Ooh, I think I'm going to acquire that as my new superpower. I've told people that grit is and not giving up, but I think it's more brute force.
I think the key is that you have to be interested in the thing that you're going for. Like I would have given up so long ago if I wasn't just totally fascinated with these new technologies and wanting to gain the superpower that they provide myself. That's a compelling reason to learn something for me.
Which lessons have you learned along the way doing all this kind of like AI ML stuff what lessons have you learned? Like what expensive mistakes can you share?
Don't accidentally leave an expensive, multi GPU virtual machine running on Amazon Web Services.
Oh no!
Yeah, I learned that lesson too. So let's
easy to do. I accidentally left it on all night last night because you have to you can click stop and then it says, "Are you sure you want to stop this machine?" And I thought I had clicked it, but apparently I hadn't, and I found it was running this morning. So I think I spent like $75 overnight.
Oh, I was going to ask you if you were over under 200 because that was my expensive lesson.
Well, my brother did it too, and his lesson was much more expensive than that. So I don't feel as bad. I can always come back and tell him that he made a much bigger mistake. But yeah, that's a tough lesson to learn. Although I think Amazon and Google Cloud love when that happens.
Huh. And can you share with us in terms of like stepping back and talking about digital marketing agency life? Can you share with us your off-the-shelf tools besides Clipfolio and Asana?
Sure. For SEO, we use SEMrush and Ahrefs mostly. For like social content data, BuzzSumo. For outreach management, we use BuzzStream. And then a lot of other various like small things for like other tasks, but like those are the main ones that we use internally.
And are you guys building lots of solutions internally with whatever language? Like, do you guys, what language do you guys lean on the most besides Python internally to kind of tie APIs together, et cetera?
It's almost entirely Python, to be honest.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, just because we do so much data scraping and data cleaning and data manipulation. You can do it in a lot of languages, but the off-the-shelf stuff and the documentation for Python is, in my opinion, better than most other languages. So, and then also Python's used in machine learning so frequently. It's kind of the standard there. So to us, we kind of double down on Python.
Can you share how you scrape?
It depends on what we're scraping. There are a lot of scraping libraries that you can use. We use one called Newspaper, which works really, really well. There's Beautiful Soup as well. I don't know if I think different ones work better for different use cases. Like in some instances, there are actually like built-in like web tools that you can add as like a browser extension to do web scraping that can be easier than writing a super complex custom code to like go through a bunch of segments of HTML. Maybe if you were super proficient at writing Python code, you could do it faster than you could with some of these web plugin or browser plugin tools. It just really depends on the case and the site. So like we did a project actually for one of our, we own a couple websites that we do content marketing work just for ourselves to drive some like secondary revenue. And we own one called lawsuit.org. And so we're trying to build it up. We're doing some link building for it right now. So I recently did a project that was scraping a public records database in Palm Beach County for traffic citations. And within the public records, if you look at an individual record, you can see the police officer's name and badge number that pulled the person over and gave them the citation. We had this interesting idea of scraping that entire set of public records for the county and then doing like a bulk data analysis of the individual police officers and their rates of citations based on like race or based on gender or based on citation type or based on location, just to see if we could find like dirty cops in the data or racist cops in the data. And we found some interesting things actually, and that we're going to be releasing that soon. But the most difficult part of that process was in writing the scraper, because it had a bunch of things to try and prevent scraping. So like CAPTCHA, like Google's click here if you're not a robot CAPTCHA. So in addition to actually writing the scrape, to navigate through the hierarchy and click through the hierarchy and then download the information once it got to the right place, we also had to write some code to handle the CAPTCHA solving and a few other small things. So like each individual case is super unique and often requires like a more technical scraping solution than you could get with like a browser plugin.
That's amazing. So do you cackle when it runs?
I mean, I was pretty happy when we finally got it to work, but it took one of our developers like 3 or 4 days to finish the code to do it.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah. What's actually interesting is that there have been some court cases that have set a precedent that say it's completely legal to fully scrape government data repositories, public government data repositories, even if they use like anti-scraping techniques to try and prevent you from doing it. So although we had to be a little bit subversive with that approach, it's a completely legal thing to do. And actually, in my opinion, a good thing to do. That data should be accessible to a wider audience of people. It shouldn't be hidden behind a whole lot of unnecessary navigation. You should just be able to get it all so that we can, as citizens, as data journalists, as content marketers, investigate important government information that affects us.
That's amazing. I feel out of my depths a little bit with all the stuff that you're doing. Like a lot of the automations that we do help agencies run smoother by automating individual processes, whether it's onboarding, whether it's task management stuff. I had not really thought about how to automate all the content marketing things. I build tools internally that auto-generate HTML output. So you put in configuration variables and it outputs the HTML code in a way that's formatted according to CSS output that we anticipate. And I feel like a rocket scientist when I get that to work. And I know my team appreciates it because they save a lot of time. But the stuff that you're doing is so next level. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Well, thank you for saying that. But I think it can be easy to get caught up in being proud about like some technical solution to something you wanted to do and get a little bit lost in like what the ultimate value of that work is. And sometimes it's like the simplest, most straightforward solutions that are code-driven or not that end up being the biggest time savers. So I think it's important to focus on ways that you can automate your business and utilize new technologies to help you do that, but not to get so focused on the fact that you're going to leverage this cool new technology that you don't think about maybe there's an easier or more straightforward way to do it that would have a much higher ROI in terms of how long it would take you to implement.
Yeah. Mary asked a question. I think she means, she said, Kristin, you are goals. And I think she means like, I don't think that's a question. I think she's saying that you're the bomb.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is that right, Mary? Is that what we mean?
Looks like.
Yeah. Yes.
So, Kristin,
Mary, do you have any questions? Ooh, there we go.
Awesome. So, Kristin, we're coming to the top of our hour, and we do want to be respectful of your time. And thank you very much for spending an hour with us.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
Anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, I enjoyed meeting you guys, and I appreciate the conversation. I'm glad you guys see, the implications of AI, NLP technologies in a similar way to how I see it. And, I hope you guys continue that conversation. And I appreciate you having me on and asking me about Fractl too. So I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we're going to have J.R. Oaks on pretty soon. And we were talking about Python dependencies, and he and I were chatting about something that he built. I was like, hey, I can't figure out how to get this to work, blah, blah, blah. And every time I ask him a question, I feel like a total dumbass. And I said, I feel dumb again. I said, does this ever get easier? You know, question mark. He's like, nope.
I can totally empathize with that. Here I sit next to Matt Gillespie, who's our head of data science, and he's a very, very proficient Python programmer. And you know, I'm constantly bugging him as I've been learning, and you have to kind of be a little bit humble and just be like, listen, I know this is a really, really dumb question, but you know, it's going to help me a lot here. So I've tried to just take the approach of like, invest in trying to learn something that's fun for me, and then not be embarrassed about being an idiot, and being okay asking for help from my colleagues that are much better at this than I am.
Yeah. I'm pretty blown away by this talk, and I feel like I couldn't focus enough, and humbly apologize. Typically I'm more on point because I don't have to, I'm physically holding the iPad steady the whole time during this whole talk. Anyway, this was amazing. Kristin, you rock. Jordan, this was amazing. Thank you. Everybody, we really appreciate you spending an hour with us, and we look forward to our next hangout in 2 weeks. Our guest is to be announced. We're very excited. We're talking to a couple people. Kristin, have a great weekend. Jordan, you too. Everybody keep automating.
You too, guys. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Kristin.
Bye.